absolutely thrilled so many of you guys are here. I wasn't expecting as many. I thought that maybe most of you would look at the agenda and go, oh, bloody hell, sexism, football, isn't that 2021? This is the mad fest. But there's still a topic of conversation to have. And it is true that we're moving along a fair bit. Give me a cheer if you know who Mary Earps is. I love that. Jordan Pickford? Just trying to get my audience right. Okay, and I know that the male Lionesses do have a tournament that's taking place right now, but for the moment, please cast your mind back a year ago to the big tournament that was happening, the Women's World Cup over in Australia. Now, attendance records were repeatedly smashed. You had sponsorship records that were being smashed. You had TV records that were being smashed. Did you know that last year, Australia versus France was the most watched television program in the history of Australia? That's like absolutely nuts. That beats Helen Daniels dying in Neighbours. This is like, is it too soon? Oh, you're all far too young. Okay. Anyway, my personal favourite record from last year was in Brisbane. So Brisbane Stadium broke its decibel record for crowd noise during Australia versus France. Can you imagine? The online trolls are there tapping away. Nobody cares about women's football. And then there's 50,000 maniacs in a stadium shouting, shut that up! That's how I felt that they were saying anyway. Okay, so all is rosy, right? Well, sadly, we have been here before, and history does tell us to be a little bit careful. Sexism is not solved in football just yet. I'm going to guess that some of you now know that women's football has had its highs and also its crushing lows. So in 1921, women's football was banned by the FA. The very body whose entire job is to promote football decided to reduce its potential acquisition targets by 50%. And it was banned for being quite unsuitable for females. Now, that ban lasted for 50 years, but the barriers didn't even start to be removed for another 20 years after that. And even I only found out relatively recently that there was a Women's World Cup that happened in 1971 in Mexico, an informal Women's World Cup. Now, it was not set up to be successful. Many women at the time were still banned, and it was informal because FIFA had refused to sanction the tournament, and so they refused to let Mexican clubs host the games in their stadiums. So the tournament organizers were kind of forced to then host the games in massive stadiums that they weren't sure that they could fill because the massive stadiums were owned by media groups, so FIFA didn't have control of them. I guess FIFA hoped that then it would be a bit of a damp squib because there'd be no chance of filling those massive stadiums. But here we are, 1971, and hundreds of thousands of people came to watch that first informal Women's World Cup. There's a really brilliant documentary on the BBC iPlayer right now called Copa 71, definitely worth watching. So immediately, the players become celebrities. Their fashion choices are revered and analyzed, their personal relationships are scrutinized. It suddenly feels very familiar, right? And then these players were blocked, barred, and forgotten. In fact, even the coach of the English team got a lifetime ban from the FA for taking the team out to Mexico. So even though I'm the first to say that women's football really can't be put back in its box right now, forgive me a little bit of fear and a little bit of tension and a little bit of anxiety that this current boom might falter or it might go down a path that is not of its own choosing. And from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges facing the game is the lack of women in leadership positions, such as at FIFA. So for all the growth and all the progress and all these records that are being smashed, barely any women sit in the roles that make decisions in football's global governance. And this is especially the case with the elected roles, such as being on the FIFA Executive Committee, which is where all the biggest decisions are made. And there are proper repercussions from this lack of diversity. And yes, some of them are absolutely, totally inane. Like last year at the Ballon d'Or Awards, which is basically the Oscars for football, they scheduled these awards at the same time that the international women's games were happening. So basically all the women that were nominated for the awards were at work. Like, this is how inane some of these decisions can be. But in other cases, some of this lack of diversity can have really devastating consequences. There are a number of assault, harassment, and even rape cases by coaches or men in the football federations, which is often covered up, including allegations swirling around a number of countries that competed at the World Cup last year. By my count, around 9 or 10 countries at the World Cup last year were in pay or condition disputes with their own federations as they landed in Australia, including our own England team, by the way. And that was all before a ball was even kicked. Now, often the impact is not as significant as rape or sexual assault, but a general kind of undermining of rights and a taking away of the power. A few years ago, I met a woman at an international football tournament in Berlin. She told me that her team, who had traveled to overseas to be there, had won their league in their country last year. And she looked really, really miserable. I was like, why are you so sad? Why are you telling me this and you look miserable? And she said, well, up until that point, we'd done everything off our own backs. But now we finally won this league. We won a cash prize. We were in the changing room talking about how we were going to spend the money. New kit, new balls, maybe we can actually hire a coach. And then a man from the federation walked in, took the envelope of cash, and said, I'll look after that. And they never saw the money again. They never saw him again. And there was nobody that they could go to advocate on their own behalf. Okay, so why is it taking so long to get more women into these decision-making roles? I reckon that probably those who are voting or promoting or electing the people to the roles think that women would maybe radically overhaul global football, tear it up, ban the men, maybe tell them it's unsuitable for people whose reproductive systems are on the outside of the body. But I don't think that the world would collapse if there were more women in decision-making roles. Because some of the most radical decisions that we want to make are simply ones that men are not thinking of and probably don't need to. So I'll tell you about one of the most massive decisions that I took whilst being CEO of Lewes FC. Huge. It was so significant that I had journalists call me up about it. There's one really eager journalist called me up. He was covering Wimbledon's decision last year to finally let women wear different color underpants under their white skirts, and that's to help female players deal with period anxiety or potential bleed-through. So that was implemented for the first time last year. Lewes had already ditched white shorts for female players for a couple of years by then. So this journalist was really keen to ask me how on earth we managed to make this breakthrough decision. And I warned him, I really don't think this is worthy of a newspaper article. He was adamant, tell me. So I said, okay, it was quite simple. When something like this. The male director, who was in charge of our relationship with our kit supplier, showed me the designs for the kit for next season. I said they were nice. Do the women's team have to wear white shorts? He said no. What color should they wear? I said black. He said okay. I can't even tell you it was a 5-minute conversation. But it was radical in a way, because what had actually happened underneath all that was a man asked a woman her opinion. The woman was in a position of decision-making power. The woman felt free to express her opinion and propose a solution. The recommendation was listened to and it was implemented. And what happened was the football environment was made radically better for 50% of the people playing in it, and the other 50% didn't even notice. There was no impact on them. And do you know what? No one actually noticed that season. The beginning of the season, Saturday, the men walk out wearing white shorts. Sunday, the women walk out wearing black shorts. Nobody noticed. So I don't think that football would necessarily collapse if there were just more women decision makers. We're simply trying to create a great environment for the whole community and not just half of it. Okay, so we want more women in these decision-making roles. Do they exist? Absolutely. There are some incredible women working in football around the world, but to get them elected into positions where they can influence the game as a whole remains a challenge. So no woman has yet ever stood for FIFA president. Only a tiny number have made it onto the FIFA executive committee, which is the one that makes the biggest decisions. But there's a personal hero of mine. She's a lawyer, super smart, and a former international player for Australia, Moya Dodd. She's one of the first women to manage to get elected onto FIFA's executive committee. She actually ended up being one of only 3 known people on that executive committee that declined a very, very expensive watch in the tens of thousands of pounds at a FIFA Congress because she identified that it could look like a bribe or that there'd be a conflict of interest. At her very first meeting when she went to FIFA, she was advised to not speak if she wanted to keep her seat. Moya, being Moya, decided that from then on she would definitely speak at every single meeting that she was at. Because the thing is, we're not there to have a seat and to collect our per diems and to get our World Cup tickets. We're there to protect these players and create football that is inclusive and run for all of society. As you can imagine, yes, she lasted 1 term. She was not re-elected. So if these exceptional, smart, ethical women can't get or then stay elected, when will the women ever hope to get elected to the highest seat at the table? Well, there is some hope. In fact, there is hope.
My name is Hope Sogni, and I am the first female candidate to stand for FIFA president. It might seem like a thing of fairy tale or fantasy for football to be governed by a woman, but I believe it can one day be our reality. History has shown us how the power of collective voices can dismantle broken systems built to protect the few. If a World Cup winner can be sexually abused in plain sight, and if a manager sacked by his federation for his treatment of women can walk straight back into international football, or the bidding process for a World Cup can be fast-tracked to hand it on a plate to a nation that oppresses women and the LGBTQ+ community, is it not time for the football world to say, enough is enough? FIFA must hold up its own mirror and decide whether what they see looking back is in fact a beautiful game, because all I see is a century of misogyny that has overshadowed its ability to truly be a game for all. I have picked my battle, and whether doors are open or closed, I am ready to challenge.
Okay, so Hope is an AI woman created by the agency Dark Horses and Twice, which is an AI platform. Together, we spent hours creating a female candidate who could represent as many women as possible who right now can't get themselves elected into those positions. So what we did was we fed Hope the speeches, the articles, the interviews, the positions of brilliant women in football from around the world, from Moya herself to the brilliant human rights lawyer Kat Craig, who represents female players who are victims of rape within football, to Khalida Popal, the first Afghan national women's team captain who was actually made a refugee because of football, to Lisa Klaveness, former player, head of the Norwegian FA, who was one of the only leaders in football to speak out on Qatar's human rights record during the Men's World Cup, and who subsequently failed to get elected onto UEFA's executive committee. So you guys can actually find Hope if you Google Hope and Twice. You can have a conversation with her yourself afterwards. Don't do it now. And you can ask her to go into more details about her positions and her policies and what she would do if she was elected. Sometimes when you speak to Hope, you can get a little bit annoyed. She is still a diplomat, and she won't get drawn into certain positions on some things. So she's quite diplomatic around the current leadership at FIFA, and she focuses her criticisms on behaviors instead of on people. She is a diplomat. But there's one other thing that we really struggled with, which was her voice. The Hope that you've just heard sounded very different originally. She sounded smart, she sounded clever, she sounded formal, but she also kind of sounded prissy and conceited and superior. And we realized that what we'd done was programmed in senior leader into the voice and made it female, and it wasn't going to work. Like, I didn't trust her. I didn't trust the nice words that she said. She sounded like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'd heard it before, ready to say the right thing, and then drop all principles upon election. And then we realized it's not enough to draw female figures from men's figures. They have to be themselves, even in AI form. So we took a step back and we considered the types of women in leadership roles that we did trust. Take Jacinda Ardern or Michelle Obama, Megan Rapinoe, and we kind of merged those types of voices into Hope's voice to make her sound a little bit different. Anyway, can an AI woman actually even help? Well, Hope is obviously not real, but her ideas and her philosophies and her evidence and her research all are real. She is AI, but she actually depends on the real lives and experiences of real women. And so I was wondering, maybe some of those cronies who find it too radical or scary to talk to a real woman in football might find it actually helpful to go and talk to her and find out her views on various policies and positions before they launch their own policies and positions. But I think one of the most significant opportunities with Hope is that you can't fire her. You can't sack her, and you can't harass or assault her. Because when women speak out on inequalities and injustices, they're often silenced, or they face other forms of retribution. They might lose their position on the national team, or they won't be elected again. So being unable to face retribution actually opens up new avenues for Hope. Maybe next year it's not me who's speaking here, it's Hope who's speaking here. Or maybe she's at another conference or in a panel with other guests. She can represent and provide protection to people who cannot be here themselves, potentially. So can an AI woman solve football's sexism crisis? Obviously, I wish that Hope didn't exist, even if I currently sound a bit like her agent trying to get conference gigs for her. It's not the case. I wish there were more women at the table, making decisions at all levels of football governance. And whilst Hope has won a number of awards, she's not won an election. And she won't, and she can't. She can't replace those slow cultural shifts that still need to happen. So she won't solve football, but she can spark maybe a bit of a conversation, despite not having those vocal cords. Now, we have to be quite strict on time, and I'm happy to take questions if we have time or afterwards. But you're always told to, I don't know, finish up these things with a joke. I'm not very good at jokes, so I asked ChatGPT to tell me a joke about women's football. Are you ready? Yes, that was exactly my reaction when I thought, oh, what's it going to be? So here we go. Why did women's football grow so quickly? Because they kicked stereotypes to the curb and scored big on the field of equality. And if that's not enough to show you that AI can't replace real people and solve sexism problems, then I don't know what else can. So, thank you.